still and more with I Read It TV. I have been scarce for a little while. I had a big change come up in my life in that I've moved to Japan. I'm in Japan right now. You will notice that this is not a studio. I'm not dressed up. I'm actually in the far corner tatami room upstairs of my in-laws' house. My wife is Japanese, and we're in the process of getting settled in. We're in the process of figuring out a living arrangement, buying a house. And in the meantime, we're staying with my parents, or excuse me, my wife's parents. And I'll be broadcasting from here. So I moved at the end of February, and February turned out to be one of the most hellacious months I remember in recent or further history. I got wickedly sick 2 times in a row. First was this just vile, I think, flu, which, at one point I was just like quivering on the couch, crawling through the house if I had to, use the bathroom or whatever. And followed by that was norovirus. The whole family got that. That was wonderful. And right after I recovered from norovirus, I had a cough. I felt a cold coming on. And, it wasn't that bad. It's kind of annoying that, the day I started feeling better from norovirus, I start coughing. And the cough was pretty consistent and dry. And I coughed my freaking rib out right here. And this is like the last week leading up to the move. So the week that, everything would have been pushed back because the whole house had been sick 2 times in a row prior to that month. And then finally I need to scramble and start moving things and getting ready. And I just couldn't do anything because I literally had a rib out. So that took a significant amount of time. In February, I wasn't recording anything. And then this month, March, I've basically been recovering and getting situated in Japan from the prior month. But anyway, here I am. Things are moving forward as normal. I apologize if the sound is a little echoey in here. It's not like I've got a bunch of sound audio stuff on the walls. Although hopefully the tatami is doing something good for the sound. I wanted to hop on here and have another MMT day because Zero Hedge recently did an article, or at least shared an article from Mises.org criticizing MMT. Now, normally articles that I read about criticisms of MMT, they last about 1 or 1.5 sentences before they get into a straw man of MMT, and they immediately go off in the direction of the straw man. And as we've discussed many, many times on this show before, MMT, or modern money theory, has largely been accepted by individuals on the left. So most MMT talking points, or are people talking about MMT online, are leftists. And when I say leftists, these are people that are interested in the Green New Deal. These are people who are going, free college for everybody, free healthcare for everybody. Now that we understand how the monetary system works, here's all the things that we're able to do, these leftist causes that we're able to do with that monetary system. Now, we on this show are not leftists. I mean, I guess you could describe us as, in quotes, right MMTers. And we've made I don't know if gargantuan's the right word, but we've made an effort to say there is a difference between the theory, which is a description of how the monetary system works, and the individual who accepts that theory. And having accepted that theory, they say, well, this is what I believe that we should do within the scope of that theory. And the right, the neoclassical people, the libertarians, the Austrians, as far as I could tell, because I was also in the Austrian libertarian / NCAP camp, that they're unable to differentiate these two things. And this article, I think, is a perfect example of it, because the article does get a little bit deeper. It does do a little bit better at building a more convincing straw man. But it's an excellent opportunity to break it down. And I have to say that I am grateful that MMT is getting more and more attention in the internet sphere. I mean, even if these articles are all straw men, you could tell that the Mises types, the Austrian economics types, I feel like they're starting to play whack-a-mole with MMT because it just keeps popping a setup, popping a setup, popping a setup. And I think at this point, if we want more discussion about modern money theory, it's more important to be controversial than accurate, right? You can be accurate until you're blue in the face, but if nobody hears you, who cares? If you're controversial and you make a spectacle, okay, maybe you make a few mistakes, but now you've got people watching and people talking about the conversation. So before I get into the article, I also want to mention I saw earlier that Professor Robert Murphy, excuse me, had a debate with a leftist MMTer. I couldn't bring myself to watch it because I looked the dude up and I started seeing YouTube videos that the guy had done, like in defense of Marx. And for anyone who's stumbling upon this new and they're going, "What, this guy's promoting MMT and he doesn't like Marx?" Yes, that's the point I'm trying to get at here, right? Is that there's ideologies that you could overlay on top of the theory, which is just an observation. MMT is simply an observation of how things work. It doesn't tell you what to do with anything. And the reason I couldn't bring myself to watch the video is because, first of all, the guy was this fat leftist. And I mean, call me prejudiced as much as you want. People who are fat, and there's multiple types of fat. People who are fat who look like they can't move, I have a hard time respecting them. I've seen fat people who could move, right? Fat people who could do stuff. Where it's almost like the fat is part of their their girth that helps them get around during the day, right? And there's people who are just like, "I'm so fat, I can't move." You look more like the latter, but I can't take anyone who takes Marx seriously, because if you look into the biography of Karl Marx, I think it's very, very clear that this guy had narcissistic personality disorder, and he was doing his best to come up with a philosophy to convince people to give him money without ever having to get a job. The guy had one job in his life. Apparently he was like a recorder for a train station or a telegraph company or something like that, and he got fired rather quickly because his handwriting was so bad. And then after that, he just mooched on people his whole life. He talked up and down about the proletariat and the plight of the working class. And when offered to actually tour a factory, he never actually went. He got mad and refused to go to it. He was completely in his mind. We'll talk about this more later. This idea later. Completely in the idea of, let me create these abstract theories and make inferences based off my abstract theories and never ever check them against reality. So, I mean, anybody who takes him seriously, well, let's review Marx and break down, the points that he had about this, that, or the other thing. It's like, this fat dude who never cleaned himself and had boils all over himself. He talks about class oppression. He gets his maid pregnant and kicks her out of the house as soon as he finds out. Ravishly poor, refuses to get a job, constantly mooching off of whoever he can, like Engels, for example. I just can't take anything that comes from someone like that seriously. So anyway, I want to get into this. And I do want to mention, I brought up Bob Murphy. So that debate came up. I was just explaining why I couldn't watch it. I wanted to mention I personally have debated Bob Murphy years in the past on the Tom Woods Show. If you search my name, Dylan Moore, Bob Murphy, in Google, I'm sure it'll pop right up. I would be happy to debate him again. But I've got a feeling, without even watching it, that Bob Murphy tore that Marxist dude a new one, and that Marxist dude probably deserved it. So, Bob, or anybody in contact with Bob, I'm happy to debate you again. And without further ado, I'd like to get into this article. So let's add this to the scene. See if this is big enough. Too big. That's what we're going to work with. Okay, this is It's on Zero Hedge, but it's authored by Frank Shoshak via Mises.org. So this originally shows up at Mises.org. This is from Sunday, March 2nd. So I'm just going to jump right into this. Frank Shostak, writes, according to the modern money theory, this is the first time I've heard anybody put the in front of it. Money is something decided by the state. I'd say money is something created by the state, but we'll let that go for a second. The MMT regards money as a token. For instance, when an individual places a coat in a cloakroom of a theater, he receives a tin disc or a paper receipt. This receipt or a disc is a proof that the individual is entitled to demand the return of his coat. According to the MMT, the material used to manufacture the tokens is irrelevant. It could be gold, silver, or any other metal, or it could even be paper. I would add that it doesn't actually even need to be anything physical. This could just be ledger entries in a book or in a computer system. Hence, the definition of money, according to the MT, is what the state decides it's going to be. MMT posits that the value of money is the outcome of the state that forces people to pay taxes with the money tokens that the state has decided upon. So far, so good. I mean, there's a couple things I might nitpick over at the beginning, but that last sentence was very accurate. The fact that there's this arbitrary token, could be made out of whatever you want. It could even not even physically exist, right? It could even be labor, right? I mean, there are societies in the past. The one that comes to mind is Incan society that the Spaniards discovered, is that taxes were paid in labor. You owed a certain amount of labor to the state per month or what week or year or whatever it was. And that value of the money, whatever the token is, comes from the fact that the state demands it in taxes. You need to pay this token or else we're going to enslave you or throw you in jail or take your property or shoot you, whatever, right? So that's true. Moving on, the state taxes have to be paid with the money tokens issued by it, correct? The state also has the ability to control the value of money through its declaration of how much it is willing to pay for a certain commodity produced by the private sector. Now, this is where we start veering into straw man land. And this is why I actually think this article is better than most, because most of the articles just say something like, MMT says that deficits don't matter, which is total nonsense. And MMT guys are the ones really jumping up and down saying how important deficits are, right? But what's going on here is this guy, Frank, is saying the state has the ability to control the value of money through its declaration of how much it is willing to pay for a certain commodity produced by the private sector. In certain situations, yes. Once the free market is flourishing, the free market starts deciding prices on its own. I'm going to get into more of that as we go. In the MMT framework, the token money is seen as a receipt on the economy's resources. Kinda. A token money held by an individual is regarded as his claim on a portion of resources. Individuals have exchanged goods and services for a receipt given to them by the government. Individuals who have generated goods and services are acknowledged for this by the tokens issued to them by the government. I think this misses the point, because fundamentally, the state, I mean, maybe modern states are interested in, we have democracies, and democracies are for the people, and we need to make sure that the people are able to engage in commerce and flourish and all this sort of stuff. So we need to make sure that the money works for the people. I mean, in modern days we do this, but in ancient times, you had a ruler, a despot, some sort of oligarchy. Think of ancient Sumeria, right? You got priest kings or priest class even before them. You have Assyrians and Babylonians and all these guys conquering each other. They're interested in tribute. They're not thinking like, how do we create an economy to make sure that the free market and the private citizen can flourish? And no, that they want slaves and tribute. So the idea of taxation is less to do with how do we create a money in order to allow the free market to flourish. It's much, much more about how do I violently transfer goods and services, resources from the, in quotes, private sector to the, in quotes, public sector. The fact that an economy emerges after the fact is, well, it's after the fact. The state comes first, and then the market arises within the conditions created by the boundaries that the state has made. This is what the historical evidence seems to support. The best book I've read on this so far is Debt: The First 5,000 Years by David Graeber. He doesn't explicitly ever say that he's an MMT guy, but what he goes into, he looks at the anthropology, the archaeology, the history of, I mean, I can't say every society on Earth that ever existed, but quite a bit of them. It's like 500 pages long. And the story just seems to repeat over and over and over again that the state comes first. They come up with some sort of token. And like I said, the token might not even be a physical thing. And that token usually revolves around honor or dividing classes within society, or figuring out how to deal with, I'll use the word crimes committed by people within the society that cannot be paid back. What do I mean by that? So if you steal a chicken from your neighbor and you get caught, restitution would be you need to replace the chicken, and that is something that you could do, right? However, if you kill your neighbor's brother and you get caught and you get dragged before whatever the, judicial proceedings are in the ancient world, there's nothing that can be done that can bring the brother back, right? There's no way to make actual restitution in that case. So how does a society deal with an act that's permanent and serious? And the examples that are given are manifold, I should say. But the one that really sticks out to my mind right now was ancient Ireland, is one of the examples that David Graeber gave, that a point system was created for like everything within the society, where I might be remembering these. I probably remember these details wrong, but it was something like this. Like, for example, a king was worth 7 points, and a slave girl was worth 1 point, and maybe a cow was worth milk cow is worth 2 points, or beehive is worth 1 point, or whatever, right? And so, if you did something bad to another citizen within the society, even the word citizen is anachronistic, did something bad to someone else in the society, whatever that bad thing you did, for example, you killed a slave girl, well, that's worth 1 point. So whatever you do, you need to do something back to that person that you transgressed against that's worth 1 point, right? Or maybe I killed the cow and the cow is worth 2 points. I can make up for that by providing 2 slave girls. And while on one hand, this obviously isn't directly money, this is the framework that money starts from, right? Because now these points start being the medium of exchange in between all of these different goods and services, right? And the point that the guy makes earlier, saying, "Hey, that the state is the person." MMT says that the state is what decides basically prices. He doesn't say prices, but the value of money through its declaration of how it's willing to pay for a certain commodity produced by the private sector. And I said it starts that way. It starts that way by the state saying, or whoever, you can't even call it a state when it's this far back, by whoever's in charge saying, here's what the prices are. Another example, ancient Sumeria, right? Where the money was, in quotes, grains of barley or wheat. And the state, the priest class, said, okay, we're going to levy taxes on everybody, but not everybody grows wheat. Not everybody grows barley. So you don't necessarily have to pay your taxes in wheat or barley. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a system of pricing where we can say, okay, a sheep is worth 10 bags of barley or whatever, and a pound of silver is worth this many bags of barley, and a box of fruit is worth this many bags of barley. And even though they're talking about grains of barley, the temptation is to say, okay, well, this is a system of barter. Well, the grain doesn't actually get bartered around. The grain just turns into a measuring unit, which becomes the token that the state demands in the tax. And then the state sets the prices by saying, okay, here's what we're saying that these things are valued. Now, at some point, the private sector, if the conditions are right, can take over and say, okay, now we're going to be the ones dictating prices, but I'll get into that in a bit. Let's just keep reading. So, yeah, it's yeah. So this last paragraph, he says the token held by the individual, the arbitrary token, is a demand on the resources within the society. And the argument that I was making is, while that's true, that's not the step one. That's an after effect. Step one is the state wants their goods and services. They create an arbitrary token to demand taxes in, which allows them to create this arbitrary token out of nothing sometimes, because sometimes it's gold and silver. They do have a limit on that gold and silver, but they have the authority to stamp on that gold and silver if they're using it, that, hey, you need to pay your taxes. The only place to get that money is from me. So now you're unemployed and you need to work for me to get those taxes. It's I would say, a diabolically genius way of figuring out how to violently move goods and services from the private sector to the public sector. Going on. However, could the sovereign state effectively require individuals to use tokens in the transactions among themselves? Why would anyone accept a fiat token as a payment simply because the government accepts those tokens as tax payments? To answer these questions, we have to define money. Now, I mean, I'll answer it first. So, could the sovereign state effectively require individuals to use tokens in the transactions amongst themselves? I mean, unless you're in like totalitarian communistville North Korea, frickin' something or other, I would say probably not. People can use whatever they want. However, once you have created this money through the demand of taxes, and presuming enough people actually have to pay the taxes, it's universally valuable. And everybody knows exactly what the value is. The value of the token is it extinguishes exactly one token's worth of tax liability, right? If you've got a US dollar and you owe $1 in taxes, that dollar, that dollar will extinguish exactly $1 of tax liability. That's where the initial value comes from. Now, at that point, can you force everyone to use it? I mean, you could try, but I think generally you don't need to, because that token is now super duper valuable. You need it to avoid getting your stuff stolen from you, or to avoid the government confiscating things from you, or throwing you in jail, or if you go back far enough, putting you into slavery. So let's see how they define money. This guy, Frank, defines money. To establish the definition of money, we have to ascertain how a money-using economy evolved. Money emerged as a result of the fact that barter could not support a complex modern market economy. Now, I'm going to criticize this guy a lot. This is just a declaration. This is just a statement. This is just an assertion, right? Money came from barter. What's the evidence to support that? MMTers will say the evidence really seems to support that there's a credit theory of money, where money came from, not barter. But I'll continue. The distinguishing characteristic of money is that it functions as a general medium of exchange, which would happen in the credit theory of money. It evolved from the most marketable commodity. On this, Rothbard wrote, quote, "Just as in nature there is a great variety of skills and resources, so there is a variety in the marketability of goods. Some goods are more widely demanded than others. Some are more divisible into smaller units without loss of value. Some more durable over long periods of time. Some more transportable over long distances. All of these advantages make for a greater marketability. It is clear that in every society, the most marketable goods will be gradually selected as the media for exchange. As they are more and more selected as media, the demand for them increases because of the use, and because of this use, and so they become even more marketable. The result is a reinforcing spiral. More marketability causes wider use as a medium, which causes more marketability, etc. Eventually, one or two commodities are used as general media in almost all exchanges, and these are called money." Now, again, this is an assertion by Rothbard. Where's the evidence that supports this? I'll keep reading. Money is the thing that all other goods and services are traded for. Sure. This fundamental characteristic of money must be contrasted with other goods. For instance, food's characteristic is that it supplies the necessary sustenance to human beings, and people may like the taste. Capital goods' characteristic is that it permits the expansion of infrastructure that in turn permits the production of a larger quantity of goods and services. Contrary to the MMT, the essence of money has nothing to do with tax payments to the government. How do you know? Based on what evidence? So, me and Nima have gone over this ad nauseum on this show, is that when it comes to the barter theory of money, a story is always spun. A story is always told, but there's never any evidence to back up that story. It's just, imagine that there's a village and there's no money, and then someone has shoes and they want chickens, and they got to go to the guy with chickens, but the guy with chickens doesn't want shoes. Imagine this, imagine that, imagine this, imagine that. It's never like, hey, we went to this village in Africa that has very little contact with the modern world, and this is how they, there's never any evidence. It's all story, right? And when he says that this is the way things work, so contrary to MMT, the essence of money has nothing to do with tax payments to the government. How do you know? Based on what? Money functions as a general means of exchange. Yes. People pay with goods and services for other goods and services with the help of money. I think I see what he's getting at here. Like, if I'm a plumber and I go work and I make money as a plumber, and then I turn around and I pay an electrician to wire my house, then I'm kind of using plumber hours to pay for electrician hours in a certain sense. So I mean, I don't think that's necessarily wrong. Money facilitates the payments of one good for another good. Also contrary to the MMT, money is not a claim on resources, but the general medium of the exchange. Yeah, again, I mean, I already addressed the claim on resources thing. In his writings, Karl Menger raised doubts about the soundness of the view that the origin of money is government proclamation. According to Menger, quote, an event of such high and universal significance and of notoriety so inevitable as the establishment by law or convention of a universal medium of exchange would have certainly have been retained in the memory of man, the more certainly inasmuch as it would have had to be performed in a great number of places. Yet no historical monument gives us trustworthy tidings of any transactions either conferring distinct recognition of media of exchange already in use, or referring to their adoption by peoples of comparatively recent culture, much less testifying to an initiation of the earliest ages of economic civilization and the use of money. Again, this is the straw man. This is the straw man. So these last, both the quote and the paragraph before it are saying, where is the legal tender laws, basically? That the law is saying, hey, everybody, you guys got to use this as money. That's not the argument from MMT. The argument for MMT is the money gets demanded in taxes and therefore becomes valuable, and after the fact, the free market, the private sector, uses it to establish a market. Reading on. Mises similarly explains the acceptance of money. In his writings, Mises has shown how the value of money is established. He's shown how the value of money has been established, or he hypothesizes how the value of money has been established. Mises began his analysis by noting that today's demand for money is determined by yesterday's purchasing power of money. Consequently, for a given supply of money, today's purchasing power is established. Yesterday's demand for money was fixed by the prior day's purchasing power of money. So for a given supply of money, yesterday's price of money was set. The same procedure applies to all past periods. Now, this is a criticism that Warren Mosley laid in an interview that we did with him a while back. And that, which is to say, the argument from, in quotes, these people, the Austrians, for example, the Mises types, is that, well, the value of money today was based on the value of money yesterday, and yesterday was based on the day before was based on the day before that, and so on and so on and so on. And there's never any way to complete that circle. It's just turtles all the way down, right? Is that, well, it was based on the day before, based on the day before, based on the day before, and it just goes into infinity, into the past. Whereas in the state or credit theory of money, or MMT understanding, is to say that, well, when money is, or when the state is formed, it creates that money. It offers money for goods and services. That's the initial value of what the goods and services are paid. right? So again, if we've got a new state, in that new state, we demand a tax. And all the people in the state go, okay, where are we supposed to get that money to pay the tax? It doesn't exist. And I say, as the government of this new state, I can create that money and you can come work for me in order to pay the tax. That's the initial setting of not value, but initial setting of prices for whatever the goods and services are. Now, if conditions arise such that I spend more money into existence than I tax back out of existence, which is to say, I run a government deficit, right? Now the private sector has more tokens left over after they've paid their taxes. Once that has happened, they can now start trading, the private sector can start trading with itself and establish a market. Once the market has been established, then they can start establishing their own prices. This is the straw man, right? Is that on one hand, yes, there is a relationship between the state setting prices and its money creation. But on the other hand, it's not like the market is just totally out of the picture. And Warren Moser brought this up as well, that right now, I'll say for the most part, the market determines prices. An example of where markets may not determine prices would be like say in the military. We need to buy a submarine or a Black Hawk helicopter or whatever. There's no free market price. I'm not going to go to blackhawk.com. I wonder what I even find at blackhawk.com. I can't go to blackhawk.com, blackhawkhelicopter.com, and scroll through and be like, oh, here's all the competitor pricing for the Black Hawk helicopters, right? No, the government says this is what we're going to pay for those things. Now, even then, I would say the government is still at the mercy of the market because okay, the metals in the Black Hawk helicopter, here's the international price for those metals, or here's you need engineers to build that thing, and the going price for engineers is $200,000 a year on the free market. So you better offer 250 or more, or else you're not going to be able to hire any engineers, and so on and so forth. So yes, the government does have some control over pricing, but even when we're talking about like stuff that only the government buys, which is military stuff, the market still has some sort of say. But if the government wanted to take back all of that power, Warren Moser pointed this out. Here's how it could be done: is you would raise taxes significantly, possibly drop spending as well. So now the government is pulling more money out of the private sector than it is putting in. And as it would do this, it would start starving out the private sector of the money it needs to function. Businesses would start to close, and the rate of unemployment would start going up and up and up. And then once you had enough unemployment throughout the land, the government can then step in and say, okay, last year, an hour's worth of labor was $20 on the market. Right now, everybody's making $0 because everybody's unemployed. We will now pay $5 an hour for labor. And everybody would go and do it because there's literally no other place to make the money. That is one way that the government could get back its control over price setting. Now, obviously, that would be an absolutely horrible, destructive, like genocidal thing to do within your society. But that I'm not trying to like make a policy suggestion. I'm just walking through the idea of, okay, how does government control pricing? And they kind of sort of do depending on the circumstances, is what I'm saying. Going on, by regressing through time, we will eventually arrive at a point in time when money was just an ordinary commodity where demand and supply set its price. Okay, according to what? The commodity had an exchange value in terms of other commodities, i.e., its exchange value was established in barter. On the day a commodity becomes money, it already has an established purchasing power or price in terms of other goods. This purchasing power enables us to set the demand for this commodity as money. This process sets its purchasing power on the day the commodity starts to function as money. Once the price of money is established, it serves as an input for the establishment of tomorrow's price of money. It follows then that without yesterday's information about the price of money, today's purchasing power cannot be established. Again, this is the turtles all the way down argument that we have to go back into infinity. And even then, there is, I guess, no eventual starting point as to figuring out how to establish the original value of even the commodities being bartered. With regards to other goods and services, history is not required to ascertain present prices. A demand for these goods arises on account of the perceived benefits from consuming them. The benefit that money provides is that it can be exchanged for goods and services. Consequently, one needs to know the past purchasing power of money in order to establish today's demand for it. Again, I'm not saying that there isn't a component of, okay, what was the price yesterday for me to figure out the price today? But to say that that is the sole source of pricing and where money comes from, there's just no goddamn evidence for it. Applying the Mises framework, also known as the regression theorem. Ooh, I'm going to dig into that here in a second. We can infer that it is not possible that money could have emerged as a result of a government decree, government endorsement, or social convention. The theorem shows that money must have emerged as a commodity. According to Rothbard, quote, money is not an abstract unit of account divorceable from a concrete good. It is not a useless token, only good for exchanging. It is not a claim on society. It is not a guarantee of a fixed price level. It is simply a commodity. Okay, so this regression theorem thing rubs me sideways. And the reason is it's the usage of the word theorem. Now, I don't know if Mises had some sort of narcissistic bent or didn't understand what a theorem was, but theorems only exist in mathematics. Even physics, it doesn't even use the word theorem. You've got the theory of gravity. You have the theory of quantum mechanics. You have the theory of electromagnetism. And the reason being is that in the realm of science, you're supposed to say, okay, we can never actually prove anything. Everything that every model that we create is always susceptible, always vulnerable to future testing to see that if it can be disproved. So we can never actually call it a theorem. We can only call it a theory. If the evidence supports it, it's a theory. If the evidence doesn't support it, we can disprove it and move on and say, okay, that was a hypothesis that we've disproved. We need to find a better model. Within the realm of mathematics, you create the system that you're working with, right? Okay, so in this world, mathematical world that we created, these are the rules. So because we've created the rules in this world that we've designed, we can say that this is true by definition. Therefore, it's a theorem. Now, how many steps divorced from physics is economics, right? I mean, if we take mathematics as kind of like the purest, whatever pure means in this case, the purest form of science. I mean, it's not even really science in itself. There's like this quantum leap between physics and mathematics. We go from mathematics to physics, which is, I would say, the most hard science that there is, right? From physics, we can get to chemistry. From chemistry, we can get to biochemistry. From biochemistry, we can get to biology. From biology, you could say we can get to psychology. Now, things get interesting when you make the leap from biology to psychology because now you've entered the volition of the individual human into the conversation. I'm going to make myself bigger here. You've entered the individual human into the conversation, the volition of the human, the behavior of the human, which makes it more difficult to predict what's going to happen. Then once you have psychology, you can talk about sociology. And I would argue that economics would be a branch of sociology. So I don't know how many steps that I just said there, was it 5 or 6, removed from mathematics, or I should say removed from physics, which won't even use the word theorem because they know better. They know better. Theorems only exist in mathematics. So when we're talking about applying the Mises framework, also known as the regression theorem, I would say the more appropriate description of this formula that Mises came up with would be the regression hypothesis. Because the barter theory should also be called the barter hypothesis. Because, it is intuitive when you think about, well, if they didn't have any money, obviously people must have bartered or something, right? It's a valid hypothesis that you would go and test. Now, like I said, if you look at the evidence, and I think one of the best books that you can find on the evidence is Debt the First 5,000 Years by David Graeber, is the evidence really doesn't seem to support the barter theory of money at all. At all. And so if you've got if Mises has this idea of, okay, here's how money came about, you've got to test it. Until you've tested it, it's just a hypothesis. So the fact that what we see here is basically they're treating economic equations like they're in this realm of pure mathematics. Here's this perfect world that we created, and because we've made all the rules and this is how the things work, we know this is true, and based on these things, these presuppositions that we know that are true, we can infer the following. Well, you need language like theorem to even talk in that realm. I mean, am I making any sense here? Right? This is really my criticism of Austrian economics is you're treating it like the realm of mathematics. You've created this perfect world, this perfect description, and you say this is how things work, and this is what we can infer based on the the mathematics and the presuppositions that we have. But it never comes back and touches reality to say, okay, wait a minute. Now let's test to make sure that all this stuff that we have in here is right before we say that it's true. So I think a lot of this nonsense continues because of words like theorem. It's not a motherfucking theorem. It's a hypothesis, and I would say it's an invalid one. MMT and wealth generation. In the MMT world, where money is generated by the government, and given that the government is able to inflate freely as much as it requires, then by implication, the government has command over unlimited amounts of wealth. Well, I would say the government has command over unlimited amounts of wealth, or I don't know about it, unlimited. It has command over the amount of wealth that it could confiscate, that it could tax, right? If the government determines what should be regarded as money and what its value is, this also means that the government dictates the rate of exchanges between money and goods and services. I've already addressed this. There is an element of that, in quotes, in the beginning, but once the market is operating on its own, the government really loses that power. This means that prices are set by the government and bypasses the free market forces. Just address that. Economic theory shows that such conduct leads to inefficient use of resources and, in turn, to economic instability and impoverishment. Again, economic theory, it doesn't say that the data shows, it says economic theory shows. Again, here's my theory, and it's not agreeing with my theory, so it must not be true. Well, what's the evidence? What's the data? MMT holds that the role of government policy should be to prevent the emergence of a situation where idle resources and unemployment emerge. So, again, this is another straw man. If you say MMT should, or excuse me, MMT says that people or the government or anything should, then you've already misunderstood it. You've already completely misunderstood it. MMT never says we should do this or we should do that. MMT just says, hey, this is, if you do X, Y happens. If you do X, if you do A, B happens. It's just a cause and effect relationship, or a list of cause and effect relationships. Individuals can come along and say, okay, based on these cause and effect relationships, I think we should do this or we should do that. Let me see if I can make an analogy. Let's take modern medicine, for example. And I know there's a lot of things that we could probably criticize about modern medicine. For the sake of the argument, let's just say that modern medicine is a fairly accurate representation of how to address healthcare, right? And let's say somebody comes in to a clinic or a hospital and he's very sick, and there's two doctors there, and they run all their tests, and they they've got their CAT scans and MRIs and their blood tests and all these things, and looking at all the data. And doctor number one goes, well, based on these list of sicknesses, I believe that we should prescribe such and such pharmaceuticals. And Dr. B says, well, I think, or excuse me, Dr. number two says, I think based on this, we should really look at this guy's diet and lifestyle, because I think the food that he might be eating could be, leading to this, or the lifestyle that he's leading could be leading to that. Now, in both of these cases, you have wildly different suggestions on how to deal with the problem. However, both doctors are working with the same model. The model doesn't say you should or shouldn't do anything. The model just says this is what it is. It's up to the individual who accepts the model to make recommendations, shoulds, based on their understanding of that model. So MMT, it's just a description. It's just saying, hey, here's the data. It's up to the individual who understands the theory, the modern money theory, the model, to say, okay, based on this data, I recommend we do this, or I recommend we do that. This is, I said this at the beginning of the show, that I'm an, in quotes, right-wing MMTer who, once I recognize that the state creates its money by demand, or the state gives value to its arbitrary token by demanding a tax, and that it has to have a deficit in order for the private sector to even have money to have a market to begin with, and it actually crashes the economy. Here's some evidence, some data, in that the 7 times that we've had depressions and economic recessions in the United States, all 7 times were preceded by either a balancing of the budget or a running a federal government surplus. What? Yeah, because once you understand the theory, you've pulled more money out of the private sector than you've put in, and you've starved them you've starved the private sector of its ability to engage in economic activity with itself. So I lost my train of thought. There was a lot of information in there. I'm going to keep reading. MMT holds that the role of government policy should be to prevent the MMT holds that the role of government policy should be to prevent the emergence of a situation where idle resources and unemployment emerge. Again, okay, this is what I was getting at, is that MMT never says should. This or that person says should. So if someone says MMT is wrong because MMT says we should do this, straw man, they don't get it. According to MMT, the key here is to boost the overall demand for goods and services to lift economic growth, eliminate unemployment, and to make full use of resources. I mean, I think it's a good idea to do that. But MMT doesn't say that you should do that at all. This could be achieved by running large budget deficits financed by printing plenty of money. In the MMT world, money printing is not a problem as long as there is unemployment and unutilized resources. Well, this just shows an entire misunderstanding of how the money system works. MMT doesn't say we should print more money. MMT says that when the government spends money, and I'm talking about the federal government here, when the federal government spends money, it creates it. It doesn't tax and then spend. It spends and then taxes. What? How do they spend? How do they spend it if they don't already have it in the first place? Because it is the sovereign monopoly issuer of that currency. It can't come from anywhere else. A government has sole authority to create its own currency. So if the government didn't create it first, there would be nothing to tax. And Warren Moser even went over this because he used to be a trader that was deep into however the functioning works for the accounting and bookkeeping for the ledger of how these things work. And he says when you see it in the ledger, the money goes out first and then it comes in second. At the federal government level, it goes out first and it comes in second. So MMT recognizes the fact that the only way to spend money is to, in quotes, print it, to create it. There is no other way. There's no other option, right? That's the observation. Now, the second observation is that if the government has not created more money than it is taxed in, thereby leaving more money in the private sector for it to participate in economic activity, you're arbitrarily preventing the private sector from operating. So if you want a private sector that operates at all, you have to have a deficit or you will crash the private sector. So unless you actually want to crash the private sector and cause austerity and starve everybody and throw them into unemployment and cause a Great Depression, which I'm sure there's some people out there that do, to say, okay, we should run now that I understand MMT, we should run a budget surplus because I want to see that crash and I want to see that suffering. Most MMTers go, we don't want to see that. So I think we should have a deficit so that doesn't happen. In the MMT world, printing money is not a problem. This is just so vague. And printing money is not a problem as long as there is unemployment and unutilized resources. Typically, MMTers would say, if you have unutilized resources, unemployment being the biggest one, which is human labor, it's basically saying you have not given enough tax tokens to the private sector to fully employ everybody. And there isn't some magic balancing act, that there's no invisible hand that's going to say, okay, well, the prices are going to come down until, or things are going to deflate as long as the government just gets out of the way to the point where everybody who wants a job can get one. Doesn't work like that. Conclusions. In MMT, money is what the government decides it is. MMT believes that because people are forced to pay taxes with the government's token of money, that the government establishes the value of money. This, in turn, makes it a medium of exchange in the private sector also. Without a freely established money, it is impossible to form a free rate of exchange between money and goods and services. Consequently, this makes it impossible to have an efficient allocation of scarce resources. This sets the foundation for economic misery. Well, I mean, this is this guy basically just saying, I don't like it. Well, maybe I don't like it either. Right? I don't like the theory of relativity, therefore it's not true. I mean, who cares if you like it or not? Who cares if you like it or not? Is that the end of it? Yeah, I guess that's the end of it. So, again, I'm happy that these conversations are now starting to percolate to the top, and it's on one hand, it's funny to see that the articles continue to be straw manning, and like I said, the most immediate indicator that you can look for a straw man article is if at any point in the article it says MMT says that we should do this. Done. It's a straw man. It's over. But again, what needs to be debated, I think, in order for the same language to be spoken, it's not whether, hey, we should print more money or we shouldn't print more money, or utilizing resources by the government is good or government price setting is bad, or any of that sort of stuff. We need to look at the base assumptions of the economic model. And as far as I've been able to boil down, there's really two base assumptions. The first base assumption is the barter theory of money versus the credit theory of money. Just as we went over into this article, this guy says, well, the barter theory of money, based on Mises' regression theorem, says this, and that. Therefore, we can infer all these other things. Versus what I'm saying with the credit theory of money, which MMT supports, that we can infer these other things. Well, if the barter theory of money is true, then everything I'm saying about MMT is gobbledygook nonsense. However, if the state theory of money is true, or the credit theory of money is true, then everything coming out of the Austrian and neoclassical camp is gobbledygook nonsense. And so the question isn't us fighting about, well, my theory sounds better than yours, or my theory is morally superior to yours. The question is, what does the data support? What does the data support? And the argument I'm making is the data does not support the barter theory of money. It supports the state theory of money. That's point number one. Point number two is this concept of the equilibrium, the concept of like this, the invisible hand that Adam Smith wrote about, that based on a certain supply and demand, a price is going to naturally find itself. And the private sector is going to correct what was it called, the higgling and diggling of the market or something like that. The buy and sell demand is going to arrive at the appropriate price. We've gone over this in another show. I'm not going to bring it up here. In an article by Richard Werner. Richard Werner, if you're not of German variety, where he breaks down why this concept of equilibrium is absolute nonsense, and that it's not a equal push and pull between the buy side and the sell side. The reality is whatever the short side is, the short side has the power. If there's more buyers than sellers, sellers have the power. If there's more sellers than buyers, if there are more sellers than buyers, buyers have the power. And so much of the neoclassical, and from what I the Austrian and the regression theorem is a perfect example of this, is they say, okay, well, we're gonna see this equilibrium come out of the supply demand curve, which is going to lead to X. Well, what if there's no such thing as the equilibrium? What if that just completely doesn't make any sense? What if people are entirely emotional and prices are initially set by the government? Well, what do you do with your equilibrium then? So if we start with those two ideas, I think we can build up from there. And as I've said, I guess ad nauseum in this show already, I think that the evidence really supports the state theory of money side, which I believe points to the direction of MMT being a more accurate model than the other economic models that are available to us right now. So I would love to debate Bob Murphy again. It would be awesome if I could do it on Zero Hedge as a platform, or even anybody else just getting on Zero Hedge and having someone try to rip my lungs out through my nose on an economic debate. I love that sort of stuff. So I guess I'll issue the challenge out that I'm ready to debate anytime, anywhere, presuming the time zone is correct now that I'm in Japan. And check more stuff out that we have on our Rita TV. If you can throw us a like or a subscribe, I hate begging for it, but this is the algorithm, and if you don't worship the algorithm correctly, you're gonna curl up and die in the system of modern fucking social media where everyone's fighting for your attention. I hope this was worth your attention. I hope it was worth you listening to this over something else. Leave me some feedback. Check us out at rita.tv. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.